Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Shawn Amick, talking about his upcoming high fantasy novel, The Cruelty of Magic. Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. I am myself an author of, a great many books of nonfiction, science fiction, and fantasy for readers of all ages. My most recent novel is The Tangled Stars. It came out from Daw Books, which has been my major publisher for many years. That's my 12th novel from Daw Books. It was and is far future outer space science fiction adventure featuring an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. It's also a heist novel. It's available in audiobook and ebook, and I highly suggest that you buy 20 or 30 copies. That would be great. I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is called Shadowpaw Press, named after our black Siberian cat. And this is the most recent thing from Shadowpaw Press, not science fiction or fantasy at all. It's a literary novel called Let Us Be True. It's about family secrets and family in general, spanning many years, from the Second World War up through the end of the 20th century and a bit into the 21st. It was originally published by Kato Books a few years ago. They went bankrupt, and several of their books have now come to Shadowpaw Press in reprint editions, and this is one of them. The author, Erna Buffy, is from Winnipeg, and the book was critically acclaimed when it came out, and nominated for a couple of awards, so do check out Let Us Be True. The other most recent releases are completely different. They are middle grade spooky stories by Governor General's award-winning author Arthur Slade. So hard to say author and Arthur, one after the other. Governor General's award-winning author Arthur Slade, who lives in Saskatoon. This was the first one in the series of 3 books. These were also Kato titles, once upon a time. They came out a lot longer ago. This is a Return of the Grudstone Ghosts, set in Moose Jaw, that hotbed of fantasy, Moose Jaw. This is Ghost Hotel, set at the Besborough Hotel, largely, in the Nutana neighborhood in Saskatoon. So Saskatoon, also a hotbed of fantasy. And then another hotbed of fantasy, or science fiction in this case, Nanaimo, for Invasion of the IQ Snatchers. And if you are Canadian, you recognize that is indeed a Nanaimo bar on the cover. All the covers, by the way, are by Saskatchewan artist Elaine M. Will, who, as you can see, does really terrific stuff. My other big release recently, that I always like to mention, of course, is science fiction. It's by Hugo and Nebula award-winning author Robert J. Sawyer, that downloaded his 25th novel, and it originally came out as an audiobook with Brendan Fraser in the cast. It was an Audible audiobook original. Hard to say Audible and audiobook, one after the other two. And when the print rights became free, they had come to me, and so Shadowpaw Press brought it out in print in Canada and the US. So check that one out as well. And finally, I want to mention a little further back, but something that relates directly to the podcast. Shapers of Worlds Volume 4 was the 4th anthology I kickstarted featuring authors who were guests of this podcast. There will be a 5th one. I kickstarted it earlier this year, and I've got almost all the stories in. There's this guy named Edward Willett who hasn't written his yet, but most of the other authors have. And this Volume 5 will be out in January, but in the meantime, you can get Volume 4 with some great authors in it, like Sherry Lynn Kenyon and Michael Brent Collins, Lavi Tedhard, David Boop, Jean-Louis Trudel, just a wonderful list of authors in here, and a story by the aforementioned Edward Willett as well. So check that out. All Shadowpaw Press books are available everywhere through any bookstore you might want to order them through. You will find them in some physical bookstores, especially in Canada, and they are also available as ebooks anywhere you buy ebooks. Okay, that covers that. Let's get on to talking about today's guest, Shawn Amick. Let me just find my glasses. There they are. And the little bio I have here. Shawn Amick is a high fantasy author, founder of the Between the Pages author community, which we talk about in the interview, and by day works as the director of a wireless franchise. The escape he felt from the world of Tolkien inspired him to create his own story full of rich lore and legend, hoping he might provide the same escape to one who sits in the corner among the silence, hoping for a world full of splendor, much as he still does. And Shawn joins me from West Virginia, so let's talk to Shawn now. So, Shawn, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We've gone around a little bit. We had this scheduled once before, and then I rescheduled it. But your book doesn't actually come out till October, so we've got this will be a good advance peek at it, since this will probably go live at the end of July. So we're going to talk about the new book, The Cruelty of Magic. But first, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into reading and writing and all that stuff?
Yeah, so grew up in Nettie, West Virginia. No one's ever heard of it for good reason. People talk about growing up in a one stoplight town. We have one stop sign, so this isn't an exaggeration. There's one intersection with one stop
Well,
sign.
I live in Saskatchewan. We have lots of one-stop sign towns.
So, I mean, I grew up there, and I, you know, I, it was probably my mother that got me really into not necessarily reading, but being a nerd. Uh, she got me into Star Wars, and she got me into Lord of the Rings, and she got me into all of those things. And because as I got older, I wanted to just further invest in those worlds, I just started reading. I think I started with like Magic School Bus books and then went on to Harry Potter and stuff like that. But yeah, I went to school in Richwood, Richwood, West Virginia, which is, also very, very small town. High school, I probably didn't really read nearly as much as I should. Most of my reading was like grade school to middle school. And I really got into writing and reading and doing everything whenever I got to college. And I
Hmm.
got to pick what I was engaging with at that point rather than just going with what I was told to engage with. And that's whenever it all really started. That's whenever I wrote my first book. No, it's not published. No, it'll never be published. No, no one will ever see that thing. But I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of writing a book, not necessarily that I was capable of writing a book of quality. So everything really started in college.
So, were you studying anything related to English, or did you take any formal classes in writing or anything like that?
Yes and no. In my total college span, I think I had six majors, and the last one was English, and it was English with a minor in like technical writing and linguistics and something else. Um, so I took all the writing courses that the university had to offer at the time. I mean, I hope that they made me a better writer. I can't speak to anything now that I would say, yes, this is, why I have this thing figured out now. But I think the biggest thing that I really learned was the value and where value stops in the peer review. When people know how to treat a peer review and
Hmm.
that sort of thing. I I write high fantasy. My genre was very much shunned by the academics of
I hear that a lot.
of my particular university. So I was kind of moving against the grain with a lot of my writing that entire time because I wasn't writing, romance.
As I like to say, I majored in journalism with a minor in art, but really I majored in Dungeons and Dragons with a minor in journalism would be more accurate to how I spent my time in university.
There you go.
So you started writing. You wrote your first book. What once you were out of university? How did it progress to where you had? This is your second book, but your first solo novel. Is that right?
So this is actually if we're going published, this is my
Yeah,
second
published. Yeah.
published, yeah, second published novel. But it is my first solo novel. The first published novel was in 2020, and it's titled Dick Stan Green. Dick, comma Stan Green, Greene. It's a play on it's noir,
Hmm.
but it's new agey noir. So in this particular world, cannabis has been federally legalized, and there's a whole lot of like clean energy movement forward, and a lot of the struggle is for the businesses and the owners and the politicians who are kind of refusing to take those next step forward. And they get mad about it and they cause a bunch of problems in the world. And then you meet your main character, who's this detective named Stan Green. And it's a very dark comedy, and the running joke is that he's that washed up detective type, but he's very different from that typical trope. And everyone's constantly calling him Dick, which is what you would refer to an old detective, like they just
Right.
called him a Dick. He thinks that they're referring to him being a detective at one point, and that's not what they're saying.
So how did that one come about?
My co-author, his name's Terry Rogers. So I'm currently the director of a wireless franchise, and within that same wireless company, I wound up meeting Terry. He was on my team at one point, and he was on my management team. And I accidentally left my writing up one day on one of the computers in the location, and he just sat down and read it, and he was like, "Hey man, I've been building this world for a decade, but I'm not good at writing. I really want to make this happen. Can you help me?" So basically, the front agreement was your world, my writing. But both of those melded into a completely different way because I made him a better writer. He got, I wound up changing his world, and so many things wound up changing. And co-authoring is not for the meek. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I haven't collaborated with anybody on fiction, but I've certainly talked to people who have, and it's always an interesting process and how they go about it and how they get through the inevitable disagreements over how things should progress.
Oh
What?
yeah.
How did you work together? Was it you each wrote a section and then you tossed them back and forth, or was it more organic than that?
So it was an evolving process for sure. At first, it was fairly well storyboarded, and it was more like, let's just put the words behind the story that exists. But that quickly changed because the story seemed like it had better potential to kind of go in a different direction. So what initially started was, I'd have this like 1,000 word box is what it felt like to write in. It was like, this is the point that we have to communicate within these words. And it didn't take long. I think we weren't out of the first chapter before I was like, absolutely not, can't do this. Like, I can't be like wrapped in this box. I need to just like, what's the beginning, what's the end of what we're trying, and just let me get there. And so then it switched to that. So what would happen is he would give me his initial, this is what's supposed to happen here. I would write, send it over to him, and I think we were using Google Docs, and he would go in, he would edit it, and then I would have to go in and edit his work, and we'd go back and forth, on each draft, probably, I don't know, 6 times before we finalized anything. And it was never finalized until like 2 weeks before it was published. Like we just kept going back and forth the whole time. But there was one point where it should have been the like penultimate disagreement that we would have had. Um, what happened is there was a character who had a longer arc in mind for Terry, my co-author in this series, and I, removed that character from the story, and like he didn't see that I was building up to that, which I thought was great, right? Like, I'm writing this with you, and I was able to trick you. And he gets to the point where he reads it and he's livid, and he's like, I'm more mad that it makes sense and I can't change it because it's better. But like, very he was pretty upset about that, but it wasn't you know anger will never do this again sort of upset. It was just like, dang it, I had a whole plan and now we got to change it.
Well, it sounds like at the very least it's great writing experience working like that and seeing how other people approach things and having to work things out. Do you think that that has, having done that novel, helped when it came to this new novel? And was that writing experience helpful for you?
Absolutely, because it helped me from a couple of perspectives. One, so the first book that I wrote, that never published, one of the reasons is because One of the reasons it's horrible is because I didn't want to do multiple drafts.
Hmm.
Like, I just wanted to write to prove that I could write. And before going into writing this book with Terry, the idea of a first and second and third draft and being very structured behind that was just uh, tasking, to say the least. I didn't want to do it. And I wanted to be able to try and have as close to a perfected product as I could by the end of the draft. Obviously, anybody that writes knows that that's a fool's hope.
It's unusual.
So writing with Terry, I lost count of the amount of drafts with all the back and forth. So now it means nothing to me. Like you just edit, whenever you feel like editing, and you get the draft done, and then you go back over it, two, three, four times until you know it to heart. So it got me a lot more comfortable with the drafting process, but it also helped me realize how hard stuck my literary voice was. I'm very Tolkien inspired. This whole arm is a Lord of the Rings tattoo sleeve.
That's
And
dedication.
oh yeah, and it shows in my writing. It's very archaic at times. It's very high fantasy, right? It's past tense. It's grandiose a lot of the time. And this book is it was not that I was writing with Terry. It was a modern age dark comedic flip on the noir genre. The voice simply didn't fit. So he's writing in a very Dirk Gently Douglas Adams voice, making fun of his own world. And I'm over here being this high fantasy voice, and trying to keep the world serious at times. And it was a nice blend. And being able to recognize, like, you can tell a very real story, but you don't have to take everything that seriously the whole time.
So now let's talk about the cruelty of magic and how it came about. It is high fantasy, so you got
Yes.
into your natural milieu here. But I guess the first place to start is with something of a synopsis. So how do you describe the book without giving away something you don't want to give away?
Yeah. So it's a multi-point of view epic fantasy where a warlord has surrounded this hidden city, and he means to destroy this city and everyone in it, and all of magic with it, and the gods too. He hates all things magical and the people that protect it. One of the main characters that you follow, it lives in this city. She's this amazing runic practitioner, and you don't really know why she's amazing, but you're intrigued as to why she is, and you want to learn more about it. One of the other main characters is a dwarf who is fleeing to the north to try and save his people. Something has happened to him, and you get to figure that out, and his journey becomes one of chasing one's own creator. And then you have this father and daughter in the sewers of this very putrid place, and they're learning what the secrets of summoning magic are, and how those roots can deeply affect the rest of the world. And all of these characters are in very different places in the world. And, their stories wind up connecting in ways that you wouldn't see. And the cruelty of magic really identifies the cruelty behind magic, a lot of the cost that gets associated to that, but the way that the actions of someone a world away can drive the way your world works.
Sounds fascinating. And how did it come about? This is the question that you're never supposed to ask, which is where do you get your ideas? But that's basically the question. What was the seed that this grew from?
Well, contrary to the typical expected, response here, I actually do have a pretty clear answer. One day, so my cousin, who lives up the road from me, reads the first book, Dick Stand Green, that I published with Terry, and he loved it. He thought it was hilarious, and he's known my obsession with Tolkien and all things fantasy since forever. And he came down and he's just like, "Well, what are you writing next?" I really don't know yet. And he just looks at me and he's like, nobody does anything good with summoning magic anymore. And I'm like, "You're right. All right." and that's where it started. And I was like, all right, well, how do I talk about summoning magic? And I was like, all right, what's the stuff that I want to talk about? And I was like, I love dwarves. And then what's the other stuff I want to talk about? And that's where it
So
all started.
so how did you go about planning it? Did you do a detailed plan ahead of time, outline, or did you just kind of start writing?
Yeah, so what is that whole thing? They pantser and
Pantser and
plotter.
plotter, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a plotzer. I don't really know how to best explain it. So I initially wrote a 20 chapter outline, I believe. Um, the intention was to take four separate point of views and to give them five very large my chapters are 5 to 7, 8,000 words long. Like they're long chapters.
That is long.
So you get a lot of time with the character and their story, and basically every story is like a mini arc of its own. It can serve very episodic in that way, and initially it was broken up to make sure that they all had their points. But then a chapter was removed, and then I was able to connect the stories in a way that I didn't expect I was going to be able to. So a lot of those things started changing. So initially, yeah, I wrote a 20 chapter outline, but I think it fell apart after like chapter 12. And this outline was little more than here's what the name of the chapter is going to be, and here's what I hope the characters do at this point in the story. Aside from that, I usually tell everyone all I ever know when I'm going in to write something is I know the beginning and I know the end. And that goes for the whole book, and that goes for the chapter. I know where that chapter is going to end. I know where it needs to start. Everything else, if my characters can't lead me there, then it wasn't strong enough.
What's your actual process like? I mean, obviously you have a business that you're running. How do you find time to write?
The same way I find time to do everything I do for work. Everything is planned. I don't rely on inspiration. I lean on discipline. Discipline's what I'm good at. So my partner, she knows that every day that there is going to be 2 hours that's blotted out where I'm focusing on writing, and that might be writing the next book, that might be editing, that might be putting out a newsletter or something to make sure that I'm continuing to speak with the audience and all those things. But that there will be 2 hours out of the day every day that gets that focus from me.
Now you talked about putting out a newsletter. You've actually built a community on TikTok and elsewhere. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so initially it was called Between the Pages. I got just kind of swept up into a whirlwind on that one. It was all very accidental. I started doing TikTok lives, and people were joining, and it started with me just doing like I was trying to do those what do they call them, reading sprints at first, and it was very awkward for me. I was like, this isn't me. Like I don't know that I really care to do this. I think I did that twice, and it took a whole, 2 times before there were 2 or 3 active people that stopped by that I engaged with that just wanted to have conversation. And then it turned into, well, let me just go live and maybe I'll read my work and see if people are interested in it. So I started reading something that was and has yet to be published. It's currently an unpublished work, though it will be the next trilogy I write when I'm done with Cruelty. And people really liked it, and more people kept joining that live and just listening to what I was writing. And then someone in the group was like, "We should make a group. We should make a Discord server so we can all chat." Because I was going live every night at this point, and all the same people were hopping on, and they just wanted a consistent space to have conversation. And then I was trying to think like, what is it that I have to offer the broader author slash reader space? Like I'm a nobody. No one cares to hear about what I have to say. So I need to find a way to be valuable to this space. And previously, I'd had experience doing interviews for Bitcoin Magazine. I'd run a podcast for my work, and I'd run a podcast for crypto at one point. And I was just like, well, I've been a leader for quite some time professionally. I've done interviews for quite some time. I think I should just transition into an interview style podcast. That seems pretty easy for me. So I threw up a post and said, hey, if you're an author and you want to get more eyes on your work, sign up here. So I went, made a Calendly link, made it super easy for people to sign up, didn't put up any paywalls or gatekeeping, and oh my God, I got flooded. At one point, I was doing 2 interviews a night, every night, 7 days a week.
Oh.
And I was doing a writing sprint every night, 7 days a week. I lost 3 hours at minimum to doing a live every night.
That's a lot.
It was very much unsustainable. But I did it for a year, and we kept it going, and the community got really large. The Between the Pages Discord is still very much a thing. I'm no longer doing the interviews. It started getting problematic in a lot of ways, and it was difficult with a lot of how like a lot of the stuff from my own personal writing was starting to go in the direction that I needed it to go in, and I wound up meeting my wonderful partner in the middle of all that, and there was a certain point where I was just like, okay, what is the most important part? Like, what has to stay? And I was like, I want to continue supporting authors, but it felt like a lot of the same returning audience was coming back, and I didn't know how really beneficial it was to the authors to hop on the podcast. Yes, you got views, but did that mean you got sales? Yes, you got followers, but did that mean you got fans? Right. And I was trying to find a way that it was going to be that 1-to-1 rewarding ratio for the author. So I've recently made a switch, and I've been writing a newsletter for quite some time. It's got, closer to 1,000 than not 1,000. So we're in the multiple hundreds now of people, nothing crazy. But it's people that want to read, and it's people that want new books. So what I've started doing is I'm working with narrators to basically give like an audio clip of the newsletter to sample their work so authors can meet new narrators. And then the authors get their book featured in the newsletter, and it's kind of going over their synopsis and my thoughts on what that book is, and maybe I'll throw in a little bit of my own stuff like poetry or something so people can make fun of me. Some form of entertainment value. But it's mostly just continuing to try and make sure that I keep supporting other authors, even if I'm not just running that podcast.
So your first book was independently published. This one got picked up by a small traditional publisher. So how did that happen? And also, through the podcast and everything else you're doing and all that interviewing and stuff, has that been very, very beneficial to you personally in promoting and building your own audience?
I don't know. I still can't really.
I've been doing this for 6 years, and I don't know. So
it's very hard to tell. Like, I can tell you, I got an audience. Once again, does that translate to book sales? That's
very, very hard to tell. Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you that I sold more books this time than I sold with Dick Stain Green. So there's something to be said for that, I suppose. As far as how did the traditional publisher come about, it was the podcast. So here's the thing that I will say: whether or not doing the podcast and creating the community led to book sales, one argument can be made one way or the other. But the argument, the thing that can't be argued is it 100% gave me connections in the industry. I met publishers, I met agents, I met editors, I met narrators, I met everyone across the spectrum. And I've made it a point to try to make sure that I continue connecting people across that spectrum. And I think that has done me something. And what happened is I had my publisher, Conquest, they were one of the interviews that I did at one point. We'd found them. I'd had my I had an EP there for a while, and she did so much for me to help run that show. And she reached out and helped schedule that interview. And they came on the show, and the conversation went really well. And afterwards, I was just jokingly messaging this publisher because they didn't even mess with fantasy. I had no thought to even try to get published through them. And I just made a throwaway comment, and I was like, well, whenever you guys start carrying fantasy, let me know. Maybe I'll submit next time. And immediately they responded, and they're like, no, submit now.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So sent it over. They gave me a, literary market analysis and all those things, and the rest is history. And, Conquest has been nothing but great to me so far.
Now, once you move into that field, as I know very well, suddenly there's a whole other layer of people who are looking at your work. What kind of editing process did you go through at that point? Also, backing up a little bit, when you were writing the book, in your own revision, do you have beta readers, that sort of thing, before you decide that it's final?
So I went through probably a little bit of a different experience than most people would for this, because I had already released this book as a
Oh, okay.
self-published book, and it was acquired to
I
be
guess I did read that
re-released.
too. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had already done alpha readers and beta readers, and
And
I'd already
actual readers.
and yeah, and actual readers, and I had paid three editors, at a certain point. Like I'd already kind of gone through a lot of that stuff, but then whenever I got picked up by the publisher, obviously, they went in and um, you know, one of the people that helps run the company, she went out of her way to make sure, like, I love fantasy. I want to be the one to edit this book, and she was phenomenal. She 100% strengthened my voice, and she was kind of the first great example of a good editor that I've really interacted with, as someone that just really understood what I was trying to communicate.
Hmm.
And really, as far as like alpha reader, beta reader, editor, all that sort of stuff, like she was that sole role for me. She did all of those things, but I had also already heavily done all of those things when I had initially released it the first time. So depends on how you want to look at it, I suppose.
I guess that explains how it has reviews on Amazon when it doesn't come out until October. I wondered about that when I saw it. I should have made the connection.
Yep.
And good reviews too. Were you okay? So it's been out. It's coming out in October. You had said you're something about you have a plan for a second trilogy. Does that mean this is the start of a trilogy?
This is the start of a trilogy, yes. I technically already finished the manuscript for the second book. I'm editing it now.
That's my next question. What are you working on now? So
Yeah, it's
what's it?
not a big spoiler. So book one's titled The Cruelty of Magic, book two's titled The Cruelty of Gods. And I'm sure you can take a guess on what book two is gonna focus on, especially for anyone that's gotten into the book. There's going to be a lot of gods, or at least what you think are gods. So it's really fun. I think anyone that reads my work knows that, especially with Cruelty and even with Dick Stan Green, that romance is never a heavy element in what I write, but I am quite proud to say that while in book two, I would not say that romance is a heavy element. Love is very prevalent, and I think that everyone's going to love the way that that's told.
Have you been pleased with reaction to your writing now that it's out in public and people have been reading it?
Absolutely, and I balk at it every time. um, I write high fantasy. I have dwarves and winged beasts and all these things. It's hard for people to not associate that to Tolkien, and the tattoo sleeve probably doesn't help. So the amount of comparisons that I get to him, I don't think that I'll ever be anywhere close to his level. But just seeing that other people are nice enough to say something like that, it always makes my day.
And where can people keep up with you online?
Well, if you go to really my TikTok, my Twitter, my Instagram, all of them have a link tree. So on TikTok you can just search Shawn Amick fantasy author. You can search the exact same thing on Twitter. You can search the exact same thing on Instagram. Um, I'm on all those platforms. I'm on Threads. As far as my direct communication, I have a personal Discord server, which you can access through my newsletter. I send out probably one or two newsletters a week. I'm on Substack and I'm on Medium. both of those platforms get different content for me. So I'm on a lot of the things.
You're not somebody it's hard to find, in other words.
No, I try not to be.
Also, when this goes live on its own webpage, I will link your main accounts there. So if you came to this via the Worldshapers website, you can just look down the page and you'll see some of those links right here on this page. Well, Shawn, thanks so much for being on. I enjoyed the chat. I hope you did as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really appreciate you bringing me on.
And I wish you the best of luck when it comes out in its new format, its new release on October 23rd, I think it is. Did I read that right?
October 15th,
Oh,
currently.
well, missed it by 8 days.
Close
Mid-October, anyway. This will have been out sometime before that, so hopefully anybody watching will go out and boost those pre-sales, so that's always good.
enough. Much appreciated, man. Thank you.
And thanks again to Shawn for that great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. A few housekeeping notes as I wrap up here. First of all, to remind you that the Worldshapers is online at theworldshapers.com. You can find it on Twitter at The Worldshapers and on Facebook at The Worldshapers. You can also find it, of course, right here on my YouTube channel, which is Edward Willett, youtube.com/Edward Willett. And you can find me, Edward Willett, at edwardwillett.com as well, and on Twitter at, X, at ewillett, on Instagram at Edward Willett Author, on Facebook at edward.willett. I'm also on Threads and Blue Sky and LinkedIn and all that. One of the things you can find here on my YouTube channel is my live streamed walks around my home city of Regina. I do those multiple times a week. Some are long, some are short, but I like to walk and blather as I walk, so you might want to check that out. And you can also find Shadowpaw Press that I mentioned online at shadowpawpress.com. Unlike me, it has the same handle everywhere, so it's Shadowpaw Press on X, Shadowpaw Press on Facebook, and Shadowpaw Press on Instagram. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I will be back. The next little bit, I will be talking to authors that I am publishing and moving a bit further outside the genres of science fiction fantasy. I've got a couple of poets I'll be talking to, and a little further on, there's a picture book author, but there will also be some authors and editors of science fiction fantasy. One book I didn't mention off the top that I recently published was Dave Duncan's posthumous science fiction novel, Traitor's Son, The Traitor's Son, and I have a second one I'm publishing called Corridor to Nightmare. Both of those were edited for publication by Dr. Robert Runte, formerly of the University of Lethbridge, and I will be talking to him at some point about those books. So lots of great stuff coming up, a little bit more focused on Shadowpaw Press authors for a bit, and then we'll see after that. But please do come back and continue to enjoy these conversations with authors about their latest books. That's it for this episode. Bye for now.